Hello, Lucas. I'm very pleased to greet you for this interview. We will spend our time speaking about depression on mental space and social panorama. My first question will be, Lucas, how would you define depression?
Depression is something that I was not specially interested in. Then it slowly came into my life as an interest. And that came over that, and then I discovered that I had been depressed 3 times in my life, but not severely depressed, but that I recognized, okay, yeah, that was depression. And then the last time it was a little bit more severe and long. And that helped me to become interested in what does that mean in mental space. But I don't define it as so different from, you could say, the DSM-5 or that psychiatrists define it. But you could say that, it's a bad mood, feeling tired, especially in the morning most of the time, and having no pleasure in things that normally make people feel happy, and that you cannot imagine to do something for fun or so, and that you go through the day, and some people can still work and can still do their things, and others may be severely depressed and they want to stay in bed, and then they get up and then they want to go back into bed, and they may try to do something, but even the most exciting movies or most beautiful music or whatever things that sport that they did is not helping them, so they become less and less active. So I think this is what depression is to most people, and by becoming interested in it from the perspective of mental space, some other and the social panorama, some other dimensions opened. And so I think I could make some steps that are relevant for psychiatry. When I have a client that is complaining about these symptoms, now I start to look at 4 different things. To diagnose what I'm dealing with takes 4 different areas. And the first area is that I will ask the client to tell about their future. And so I look at their future timeline. Do they have a future? Now, some people are depressed because they just lost their job. They had built their whole future on the base of this job, this career, and now it's gone. Or maybe on a relationship, or on having a child, or not having a child, but something that dealt with its future. And then they hear, you will not have children, or you are fired, or you are... And so their whole future timeline, you could say, becomes irrelevant and black, and they cannot look in the future without seeing, what I thought that I had, this future is gone now. Now that can have happened recently, but that's a reason to first look at that. Now, and then there's another area. I ask them when they have no issues with the future timeline, did you lose somebody? So is it grief? Because the symptoms of grief are very similar, often to the symptoms of depression. And you could say that depression can be caused by grief. And then when you say, I lost my husband or my child or my father or mother, and so then I know, okay, this is depression based on grief. And then it's the social panorama, and what we were talking in the first interview about, that you need to look, where is this image of the deceased person located? Maybe very close, or maybe in your body. How long already is it there? So, because most people, they come only after several years with these complaints, so this is something that they first wait out to go away, and then when it doesn't go away, they may seek help, and then it may be that we find that they have imagery of dead people in the proximity in their social panorama, and that can be the reason why they have this problem. Logically, I work with grief, which means that this image needs to be moved to another location. And you can think of that normally, like in most religions, there's a sort of a prescription, you could say, for where to move the dead. And then often the spirits of the dead. And that's in Christianity, it's to heaven. That means that you need to have a location in your mental space, probably up there. So you can see it behind me, spiritual panorama, where you maybe have envisioned God and Jesus and angels and the other dead and whatever you have learned. And that could be the place where the dead person needs to go. About, depending just on what you think is the appropriate thing. Now, that can be different for other religions. And some religions have that the spirits of the dead go to the underworld or to a tree or stay, but in a different shape in between the living. And so that is then something that would be part of the work to take care of that type of depression. Now, and then there's depression that comes from having had a traumatic experience. Now, of course, losing somebody, losing your perspective on the future is also, you could say, traumatic. So there's a big overlap in these things when you look at that from a process perspective. And so traditional psychiatry looks more to the content. So they think, we have a case of grief, or we have a case of trauma, or trauma because of work, or trauma because of violence, or trauma because of sexual misbehavior or whatever. But for us as NLPers, we came to this view on process versus content, and then we came to the conclusion, trauma, it doesn't matter that much what the trauma is about, and it's often only a matter that the therapist is curious. So what happened? What happened between your uncle or so? But that you don't need to know what happened to work with that. So that's a very important step that we made in NLP, and I think this is also very hard not to crack for many traditional therapists, because they are so much thinking that they should advise a client how to deal with this particular content, and it's not your fault, and that's terrible that they did that to you, and so on. And from empathy and understanding, and maybe from having insight in how often this happened, try to teach the client something. But then, of course, these days there are techniques like EMDR that are used for trauma, and I think this is appropriate, and it's very good to know that it stems from NLP, but that most people that use it strictly use it, that they were not aware of that, and so and it has special historic grounds why EMDR is taught in academic circles, in circles of psychiatrists, and they don't know where it came from, or they have a certain story that stopped by where it originated from, after where it included NLP. And so that's interesting, just historically. But for us, we could say that at least one technique of NLP made it to psychiatry and academic clinical psychology, and that is EMDR. And so the rest was discarded or rejected or disbelieved, but EMDR made it, and probably because of this blending out of the history with NLP. And so probably because of that. Now, so then there's these 3 points that I look at. Is it a trauma? And when it's a trauma, then we can use all the technologies we have for trauma. And then there's the other thing, and that is when there's no answer. And this is, to me, an important category of depression, where the client, when you ask, how's your future, or did you lose somebody, or did your house burn down, or did you have a car accident or so, they don't know. And so they say, no, nothing happened, I don't know. It just started slowly, and then it became worse, and it's already there for 20 years, and I don't know why. And these are the clients that I look for clouds of darkness, for areas of darkness in their mental space. And we did a piece of research, or we did a serious study on that, which is in the book, a neurolinguistic programming in clinical settings, that was Routledge, that was edited by Lisa de Rijk and Richard Gray and Frank Burg. And there's this study is also in one chapter. And and that helped us to understand that it would be very good to have this category of diagnosis, depression with an unknown cause, where the client cannot explain that. And then when you recognize, okay, the client doesn't know why they are depressed, then we can look for clouds of darkness. And these clouds of darkness seem to be, I start to believe that for 99%, a neurological phenomenon of repression. So when the client started to repress something in their often early childhood, this may not cause any issue for many years, but then may show up when it's reactivated, or when it gets some function in their life, or there's some reason for that, as dark areas. Now, and they're not so aware of these dark areas, because they're more like gray filters in their experience. So you can think of it that you have this dark mist that's not so so extreme, and you can still look a little bit through it and around it, so it's not blinding you, but it takes away the color out of your experience and the intensity, and it's just disturbing you, because it breaks also your view on now and your future often. So it's just a haze of darkness. Now, and this was something that I myself also discovered in myself. And then I also slowly found a way of how to deal with that. And so dealing with that is in a way not so difficult, but it takes a good, you could say, master practitioner NLP to do it successfully, because there are some pitfalls, some small difficulties that where people can do it wrong, and then it's not so successful. And so this is also something that we found out in our research, that only a part of the trained NLPers could do it successfully, because the others, they thought it was, they didn't notice the critical steps that well. Now, how does it go? It starts, of course, with the client connecting to their feeling of depression. So it's feel your feeling of depression. Now, and when you have that, where are your black clouds? So by implication, ask them where they see black clouds. And that makes it just easy, because when you ask, and are there any black clouds? And so they may have to look at things they have already habituated, so they are not surprised by, and they may oversee them, and so they may not notice them. But when I ask, where are your black clouds? Tell me. And so they may point out here and there, or just here or here. And the next thing is that when I believe that these black clouds or areas of darkness or zones of darkness, that they are stemming from repressing something, then it's logical that the something that's repressed is not known, because it's repressed. And so we need to get to know it before we can work with it. So, and we ourselves don't need to know it so well, but the client needs to be reconnected with what they repressed. And of course, this is exactly the theory of Sigmund Freud. And so we can say this is psychoanalysis in a way, where the idea of clients coming into therapy having repressed something, or Pierre Janet. So he had the same view in Salpêtrière. So there is something that the client doesn't know, has dissociated, but we can say repressed, and this is causing their problems. There we need to be quite open, because many people have learned that psychoanalysis is a stupid view on the psyche, and we came over that, and now we're much further. We don't have to look at it anymore, and a concept like repression has no valid scientific background. But you only need to look at the science there, and you find that it does have that, and that also in the neuroscience they found that there's solid evidence for frontal mechanisms of inhibitory neurons that do the repression and that are involved. And these are probably these areas that do overwork, and so they are overactive when the person is depressed. And because they are the areas that tire out, they get tired first, and so they break concentration and may also be involved in sleeping problems, etc. And so then you can understand many more aspects of the symptoms of depression when you see it like that. Gray filters make sure that you don't see anything of any color, so there's nothing happiness to become happy about. So there's no nice things to see, but it's all colorless. And then these that you have to repress it all the time, causes you feeling tired and waking up exhausted in the morning and not being able to concentrate yourself for a long time to anything, and so on. And so that's that. And then when it comes to the treatment, so there we ask the client to imagine that the sun shines on the dark clouds. This often tends them to be lighting up, as you can expect. Then bring these clouds of darkness to the center of attention, because there's where they tend not to be. So the center of attention in mental space is here. Here we have the greatest control over our thought. So we have moved dark clouds out of there when they would have appeared there. But when we bring them there, we can do something with them. Now, when we ask the client to do that, it tends to be that the clouds become smaller and transparent. And we can just ask the client, okay, what was hiding behind this black clouds? What was there? What did you give up in your life? Where did you stop thinking about? What was there that was an issue that you could not handle? And so sometimes clear traumas also show up, but it may be something of early childhood. So very often we have things that stem from 4 years of age. And probably this is where people become competent of repression, so that the brain becomes capable of repressing something at 4 years. And also maybe things happen of the category that you would like to repress. And so with your limited qualities at that time, life can be very shameful or can be very difficult in some areas. And so then you don't want to think about it anymore. And then you're stuck with some old issue. So that's what we tend to find. And then we use the techniques that NLP already has developed in the end of the 70s. So what I might prefer technique is the new behavior generator, which is, and it works like this. So we first suggest a timeline, ask the client, okay, when did this start? And so then they become 4 years of age. Okay, see your younger self there and see what happened. Now, what was it what you should have been capable of to deal with what happened? And here, this is often the critical point. Because the mistake many people make is that they want to find a resource to make everything good for the client. And so, for instance, when the client was not capable of keeping their parents together or so, the resource is not what should you have had to keep your parents together, because that's not possible for a child to do that. And so that's the wrong resource. But that's sometimes people who do this technique, they come to the client wants that, of course, and comes with such an answer, and you need to be very critical. No, it's not about that. It's about how to deal when you cannot make that happen as a child. So when you need to give up trying and see that you're not responsible, etc. And so with this, now these resources are the ones that we need. And then the next thing is when the client has identified what's needed, then it's often they may have that resource in their current grown-up self, but often they need a model for that. And the things may be quite difficult, so people can be depressed because of very difficult issues where you could say normal human resources doesn't work that well. And so you may need spiritual resources or resources that are stemming from examples of very great examples like Gandhi or
Buddha.
Yeah, right. And then they use this model and then study the resource. And this is, of course, something that you need to work very good on, because this is the thing that makes the work effective. So the resource needs to really be experienced very strongly and need to be the right one. So you need to check that. Now, and when it's functioning, this resource is then transferred from the model to the image of the self. And then when the image of the self has the resource, the image of the self is taken in. And then you can check whether the client believes that they can do it now. And then they bring that resource to the younger self before they needed that. And then the younger self can have this possibility. Now, and then you can do either in dissociation, see yourself grow up with that first maybe, and then next step into your younger self, having this resource, and then grow up again. Now, and then when they get back into the present, we just check depression. So the next thing is, so go back to your feeling of depression, and where are your darkness, clouds of darkness. And that does it. And so that makes it also very well testable, especially when you use the same way of commanding them to become depressed and find their clouds of darkness. And so then, and when they are obedient types, so they try, and then they say, sorry, but I cannot find it again. And then you know, yeah, we did it.
What happened for the person who have been in depression for 40 years and cannot find them after 1 hour with you?
Yeah, so you maybe have seen my movie, Where's My Depression Gone? The first was a title, Where the Fuck Is My Depression Gone? Because you have the situation that the person is so used to living with the depression, and then the people around them, the partner, the children, everybody has to count the client out of anything that is demanding or is not is too happy. And so are we going to celebrate her birthday? No, because she's too depressed. We may just now buy her a little gift, but not too much, because otherwise she will suffer more than she will. You know, the whole life can be arranged around the depression. And so there can be a lot of work around that for a client. So how to get home and now tell to their spouse, my dear, my depression is gone. And then the spouse may, who did that? Who the hell did it? I kill him. maybe the partner is not capable of living with a person without a depression. And so their marriage was based on them, the partner having a depression. So we don't know. And so there can be some ecological issues there, but I must say that quite often it's not the case. And then the person is just happy and everybody is happy. So that can happen very well. And of course, they may have issues with how can I be so stupid that I didn't resolve it by myself, or that I not think about it. And I explained that to them, that it's just a mechanism that they felt, yeah, they did it themselves, they repressed it, and then they were a victim of that repression for 40 years. But they also had the benefits. Maybe they couldn't have lived for 40 years when they didn't have repressed it. So there's always a reframe that you can make with something like this. And then also you can say, well, if you rather have stayed remain depressed because it's so difficult to think of a life without, yeah, we can turn it back. No, you cannot, but then they probably choose for the wise option to rather have the rest of their life without a depression. And so
it looks like many subjects in life are about do we have the resource to cope with a situation or don't we have it? Is it true?
Yeah. Well, I think that's also very logical when you think of people writing their own mental software, and that what you learn at school is not what you need for dealing with traumas and difficult things and being a victim of a scandal or made ridiculous in front of class or so. And you don't learn that. So you need to invent it yourself. And so then it's logical that there's a lot of things that you cannot handle. And you may have parents that help you, but of course people who don't have parents that have the time, or who have no parents that are wise enough or have another idea about education or how to raise children. And so they may think, well, yeah, my child was beaten up at school. No, good. So that's how you get stronger. But maybe this child doesn't get stronger because he doesn't find a way how to deal with it. And nobody helps him how to deal with that. So yeah, he needs to find the resources still.
If we imagine that we have some listeners that are depressed at the moment, if there was one advice you could give them, what would be this advice or a first step?
When you are depressed, then you can do the first part yourself. When you have found your dark areas, so because you find your dark areas at the moment that you feel depressed. And then you need to, maybe you need to write a note and hang that on the ceiling of above your bed, so that when you wake up and feel depressed, that you read, where is my dark area? So that you remember in the right moment. And then you find it probably. Now, when you have found it, you can still try to reduce the darkness and move it on your own, and then come to the question, what was behind it? And maybe you get an answer. And from there on, you may need help. So some people may do it all on their own. And some are lucky. So because sometimes when you remember, it was a stupid situation at kindergarten. Oh my goodness, that I could have lived with, not dealing with that for so many years. Yeah, now I would do it like this. So it can alleviate your depression in one go by yourself. So that's possible, because we need to always assume that people resolve all their issues themselves. So without any help. And there's also in psychiatry that even when nobody helps the client with their depression and only gives them sedation to not be too sad, then they probably will get out of it at one moment. And maybe they do that in the same manner, bits and pieces, so that they find the solution, the resources that they needed for this issue. So it's of course the belief in that it has a logic, and there's it has a learning history. It was learned and it can be unlearned in the right manner. And that's of course NLP. And that's what we want to believe in NLP. And that's what has helped us this far. So to believe that type of philosophy. And so when you believe that depression is something, that happens, is more biological, and it's a disbalance in your hormones, and when you're the victim of that, then you need to get your hormones rebalanced. Now that can be done. We can try which pills do that for you, and then when we have find the right mix for you, then you have to take that maybe for the rest of your life, because we cannot then measure whether it has gone by itself. And so it's depending on the doctrine that you use around these issues. Now, and I cannot prove that I'm right with the view that I have, but pragmatically you can say, you get at least further where you believe that there is a logic behind it and there is a mechanism, because then you start to search for the mechanism, and then you may find it. And I believe that I found some of that, and when I use that, apply that with my clients, I see also that it works. And when I tested it out with a group of therapists we had about 50 clients, then we could see, most of the time it reduces the depression. I believe that when you're technically good, then it will really reduce it 100%. So there some people need to have more than one day of training, so that I found out. So in our research, we did one follow-up study, studying the therapists that took part, and then the ones who produced the data, and ones who could not produce data because they could not organize it, or they could not do the technique. And so from that you also learn that when you want to do it, then you need to be very serious about it, and to really know what you're doing. Because there are some therapists that I know that are successful with that every time. So because they do it right. So
that's simple. I would like to know your position about taking medicine when we are on depression. Should we sometimes can we get some help with medicine, or do you think it's helpless?
Well, I think I'm not against that, because depression can be life-threatening. Some people commit suicide because of their depression, and so when they can be helped with an antidepressant, this may save their life. And when there's nobody, there's not that many people who can work so well with depression yet. But we are not the only one, and this is not the only way. So there's other therapies that help. There's methods. So even electroshocks may help. So there's different methods that have helped, but some are of course quite dangerous, like psychosurgery. So that has helped too, but I would not recommend that, because you cannot undo it. So when you do lobotomy, so then the client may be less depressed but more zombie afterward. And you cannot repair that. And some pharmaceutical treatments, it may help the person to survive their depression, and maybe stay on a waiting list there's a therapist who can really work with them. But I don't see that as the definitive treatment, of course. And so that's what I see. I think it's there's maybe psychological issues where some drugs will be the treatment you need. So I think that maybe epilepsy will need just some medical treatment, and then it will help you to have less severe epileptic seizures. So maybe there are also cases where psychotherapy may be helpful, or psychotherapy to deal with that, to help you to have a better life. Or to find your way with having such an issue. So I think that there may be more. So when it's about real brain damage, so you can think that the more the brain is damaged, the more you need to work with the brain as an organ, and with the chemistry in the brain and with the anatomy of the brain. But when the brain is intact, then psychotherapy could do something, because then you could say it's a more software problem. So that's where we work on.
Thank you very much, Lucas, for all those explanations, and thank you for your time.
Yes, well, I like always to say, well, it will not be the final word, and it's not all the truth, but it's what I believe at the moment.
Thank you very much, Lucas.
Thank you, Isabel.